Are you telling me how to do my job? You're a resident. I am not going to let you talk to me like that.
When doctors told the Harvard-trained physician to know her place and stick to mopping floors, they had no idea she was about to expose the racist system that nearly killed a baby right in front of them. What happened next didn't just save one child's life. It brought down an entire hospital's reputation and proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is powerless. In the sterile corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital, Maria moves quietly, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished linoleum. The smell of antiseptic mingles with the distant hum of machines, creating an atmosphere where hope and despair dance together in every room. At 28, Maria has worked as a hospital cleaner for 3 years, her dark hair always pulled, back in a neat ponytail, her uniform pressed despite its worn edges. No one knows that beneath her humble exterior lies a Harvard Medical School graduate. No one even notices the way her eyes linger on patient charts, or how her hands pause when she overhears medical discussions in the hallways. To the doctors and nurses rushing past, she's invisible, just another member of the cleaning staff, who keeps their world functioning while remaining unseen. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as Maria pushed her cart past the emergency room, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "I don't understand why we're wasting resources on these people," Dr. Harrison muttered to his colleague, Dr. Peterson, their voices carrying through the partially open door. "They come in here with no insurance, can't even speak proper English, and expect us to perform miracles." Through the gap in the door, Maria could see a young Latina woman, probably no older than 25, clutching a crying infant to her chest. The baby's breathing was labored, each small gasp a desperate fight for air. Maria's trained eye immediately recognized the signs: acute respiratory distress, possibly pneumonia or bronchiolitis. "The kid's probably just got a cold," Dr. Harrison continued, barely glancing at the chart. "Give them some over-the-counter medication and send them home. We can't tie up beds for every sniffling child who walks through that door." Maria's hands tightened on her mop handle. She'd seen this before. The casual dismissal, the assumptions based on appearance, the dangerous shortcuts taken when treating patients who didn't fit a certain profile. But this time felt different. This time, she could see the blue tinge around the baby's lips, the way its tiny chest worked overtime with each breath. Without thinking, she stepped closer to the door. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't help but notice that baby's oxygen saturation looks concerning. The intercostal retractions and nasal flaring suggest significant respiratory distress. Maybe consider a chest X-ray and arterial blood gas analysis?" The two doctors turned to stare at her, their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Dr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" His voice dripped with condescension. "Are you seriously trying to tell me how to practice medicine? I was just observing that." "You're a janitor," Dr. Peterson interrupted with a smirk. "Stick to mopping floors and leave the medical decisions to people who actually went to medical school." Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but something deeper stirred within her, something that had been dormant for too long. "I understand, but that child really needs—" "What that child needs," Dr. Harrison said, raising his voice enough to draw attention from nearby nurses, "is for the cleaning lady to mind her own business and get back to work." A few nurses had stopped to watch the exchange, some shaking their heads with amused disbelief. Maria could hear their whispered comments. Can you believe she thinks she knows better than the doctors? Some people really need to know their place. But as Maria looked back at the desperate mother holding her struggling child, she saw her own reflection from years ago. Another young woman of color being dismissed, being told her concerns didn't matter, being made invisible by a system that judged her worth by her appearance rather than her knowledge. What they didn't know was that Maria Rodriguez hadn't always pushed a cleaning cart through hospital hallways. What they couldn't see was the brilliant mind that had once been celebrated in medical journals, the hands that had once saved lives in operating rooms, the heart that had sacrificed everything for love and family. And with just one more look at that dying baby's blue lips, she was about to make a decision that would change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. Before we continue with Maria's incredible story, I need to ask you something. If you believe that everyone deserves to be heard regardless of their job title or background, please hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to sharing stories of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Also, on a scale of 0 to 10, how angry does this kind of discrimination make you? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your voices matter to this community. And here's something that might surprise you about this story. It gets much more intense from here. So make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will completely change how you think about judging people based on appearances. Now let's continue with what Maria did next. Maria Rodriguez had worked at St. Mary's General Hospital for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Every morning at 5 a.m., she arrived through the staff entrance, changed into her blue uniform in the basement locker room, and began her rounds with a quiet determination that no one bothered to notice. The doctors and nurses moved through the halls like they owned the place, their white coats and scrubs marking them as the chosen ones, the educated ones, the ones who mattered. They walked past Maria as if she were part of the furniture, necessary for the hospital's function, but not worthy of acknowledgement or conversation. But Maria watched. She always watched. The prestigious medical center buzzed with cutting-edge technology and renowned specialists, its reputation built on excellence and innovation. Awards lined the walls, proclaiming St. Mary's as one of the top hospitals in the state. Yet Maria had learned that excellence could coexist with blindness, that intelligence could live alongside ignorance. She'd memorized the patterns, which doctors actually cared about their patients, and which ones saw only insurance cards and demographic statistics. She knew Dr. Harrison's reputation for dismissing minority patients, his tendency to spend less time with anyone who didn't speak perfect English or wear expensive clothes. She'd witnessed Dr. Peterson's casual cruelty disguised as professional. Efficiency. On that Tuesday morning, as Maria heard the familiar tone of dismissal in their voices, something inside her shifted. She'd seen too many families turned away, too many symptoms minimized, too many lives devalued because they didn't fit the right profile. The young mother in the emergency room reminded her of herself. The same desperate look, the same fierce protectiveness, the same vulnerability in a system that saw her as less deserving of care. Maria moved closer to the door, her heart pounding as she listened to the doctor's callous conversation. "The kid's probably just got a cold," Dr. Harrison was saying, and Maria could see him barely glancing at the chart. Her medical training, dormant but never forgotten, immediately kicked in as she observed the infant's condition through the doorway. The baby's breathing was rapid and shallow, with visible retractions, the skin pulling in around the ribs with each labored breath. The slight blue tint around the lips indicated oxygen deprivation. These weren't symptoms of a simple cold. This child was in serious respiratory distress. Maria had seen cases like this before, back when she wore scrubs instead of a cleaning uniform, back when her voice carried weight and respect. Bronchiolitis, possibly RSV, or even pneumonia. Any of these conditions could be life-threatening if left untreated, especially in an infant. Without fully considering the consequences, she spoke up. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice carrying the authority of years of medical training. "I couldn't help but notice that baby's oxygen saturation looks concerning. The intercostal retractions and nasal flaring suggest significant respiratory distress. Maybe consider a chest X-ray and arterial blood gas analysis." The words flowed naturally, precisely, each medical term chosen for its accuracy. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the uniform she wore, forgot the role she'd been relegated to. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Harrison turned slowly, his face transitioning from surprise to outrage. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" His voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose authority had been challenged by what he considered an inferior. Dr. Peterson joined in with barely concealed amusement. "Are you seriously trying to tell me how to practice medicine?" Maria felt. The familiar sting of dismissal, the same tone she'd heard directed at patients who looked like her, families who spoke with accents, children whose parents worked multiple jobs just to survive. But this time, the dismissal was aimed at her directly. "I was just observing that," she began, trying to maintain her professional composure. "You're a janitor," Dr. Peterson interrupted, his smirk widening. "Stick to mopping floors and leave the medical decisions to people who actually went to medical school." The words hit like a physical blow. People who actually went to medical school? If only they knew. If only they could see past the uniform to the woman underneath. The doctor who had sacrificed everything for love and family obligations. "I understand. But that child really needs—" Maria tried once more, her voice barely above a whisper. "What that child needs," Dr. Harrison said, raising his voice loud enough to attract an audience, "is for the cleaning lady to mind her own business and get back to work." The gathering crowd of nurses and staff exchanged glances, some shaking their heads with amusement at the audacious janitor who thought she could diagnose patients. Their whispered comments cut through the air. "Can you believe she thinks she knows better than the doctors? Some people really need to know their place." But as Maria looked back at the desperate mother and her struggling child, something deeper than embarrassment settled in her chest. That wasn't just humiliation she felt. That was righteous anger finally awakening after years of dormancy. Because, in that moment, she saw herself, not as the invisible cleaning lady they dismissed, but as Dr. Maria Rodriguez, who had once been at the top of her Harvard Medical School class, who had once saved countless lives, who still carried all that knowledge and skill beneath a humble exterior. The next day, Maria couldn't shake the image of that struggling baby from her mind. As she moved through her cleaning routine, every cough she heard, every worried parent she passed, reminded her of the casual cruelty she'd witnessed. The antiseptic smell that usually faded into background now seemed to burn her nostrils, a constant reminder of the sterile environment where humanity had been forgotten. During her lunch break in the basement cafeteria, Maria sat alone at a corner table, picking at a sandwich she'd brought from home. The hospital staff filled the room around her, doctors discussing complex cases, nurses sharing stories of difficult patients, administrators debating budgets. Their voices created a symphony of purpose and belonging that she had once been part of. At a nearby table, Dr. Harrison held court with several colleagues, his voice carrying over the ambient noise. "You should have seen it," he was saying with obvious amusement. The cleaning lady tried to diagnose a patient yesterday. Started throwing around medical terms like she knew what she was talking about. His companions laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "What did she say?" asked Dr. Peterson, genuinely curious. "Something about oxygen saturation and intercostal retractions," Dr. Harrison replied, his tone mocking. "Probably heard it on some medical drama on TV. These people watch a few episodes of Grey's Anatomy and think they're surgeons." The laughter that followed felt like razors against Maria's skin. These people. The casual racism embedded in those two words revealed everything about how they saw her. Not as an individual with her own story, her own intelligence, her own worth, but as a representative of a group they'd already decided was lesser. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped her water bottle. She wanted to stand up, to walk over to their table, to tell them exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished. But she also knew that in her current position, her blue uniform would speak louder than any credentials she might claim. Instead, she listened as the conversation continued. "Did you follow up on that baby?" Dr. Peterson asked, taking a bite of his salad. "Sent them home with some cough medicine," Dr. Harrison replied dismissively. "Mother was making a big fuss about nothing. They always do. Turn every little sniffle into a medical emergency because they want free health care." Maria's blood turned to ice. Sent them home with cough medicine for a baby who had been showing clear signs of respiratory distress. She thought about her own daughter, Isabella, now 15 and thriving because Maria had sacrificed her career to care for her when she was born with serious heart complications. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the desperate trips to emergency rooms where she'd been dismissed as an overreacting mother until she'd insisted on being heard. If she hadn't fought for Isabella, hadn't used her medical knowledge to advocate fiercely, her daughter might not be alive today. That afternoon, Maria's cleaning route took her past the emergency room again. She moved slower than usual, her eyes scanning for any sign of the young mother and her baby. Part of her hoped they wouldn't return, that Dr. Harrison had been right, and it really was just a minor cold that had resolved with rest and over-the-counter medication. But deep in her medical mind, she knew better. The symptoms she'd observed weren't minor. The blue lips, the labored breathing, the obvious distress. These were warning signs that couldn't be dismissed with cough syrup. At 3:47 p.m., her fears were confirmed. The automatic doors of the emergency room burst open, and the same young mother rushed in, but this time she was crying, her baby limp and barely responsive in her arms. The infant's lips were now distinctly blue, and its breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. "Please, help us," the mother cried in accented English, her voice breaking with panic. "My baby won't wake up. Please, somebody help." Maria dropped, her mop bucket with a loud clatter, medical instincts overriding everything else. The baby was in severe respiratory distress, possibly respiratory failure. Without immediate intervention, the child could die. Dr. Peterson emerged from behind the triage desk, his expression annoyed rather than concerned. "Ma'am, you need to calm down and wait your turn. We have procedures here." "My baby is dying," the mother screamed, holding her child closer. "Yesterday you said it was just a cold, but look at him. Please, look at him." Maria watched from her position near the wall, her heart pounding. Dr. Peterson barely glanced at the infant before sighing with exaggerated patience. "Children get sick," he said condescendingly. "It's normal. But rushing in here screaming isn't going to help anyone." Fill out these forms and take a seat. Someone will see you when we have time." "You don't understand," the mother pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "He can't breathe. He won't wake up. Please, just look at him." "I am looking," Dr. Peterson replied coldly. "And what I see is another hysterical mother who doesn't know the difference between a sick baby and a medical emergency." That was the moment Maria's 3 years of silent observation, 3 years of swallowed pride, 3 years of being invisible, came to an end. She stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "That child needs immediate oxygen support and emergency intubation. He's in respiratory failure." Every head in the emergency room turned toward her. The busy waiting room fell silent. Dr. Peterson's face flushed with anger. "Not you again," he snarled. "I told you yesterday to mind your own business." But this time, Maria didn't step back. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady and strong. "That baby is dying," she said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "And if you don't act now, his death will be on your hands." Without waiting for permission, Maria walked directly to the mother and child, her medical training taking complete control. In her small apartment that night, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a worn leather portfolio spread before her. The apartment was modest but clean, with family photos covering one wall and medical textbooks still lining a small shelf in the corner. Isabella was at her part-time job, giving Maria the solitude she needed to confront the ghosts of her past. The portfolio contained the remnants of a life she'd left behind: diplomas, awards, letters of recommendation, and published research, papers that bore her name in prestigious medical journals. Dr. Maria Elena Rodriguez, M.D., Harvard Medical School, class of 2015, summa cum laude. On the leather cover, embossed in gold lettering, were the words Harvard Medical School. Inside, the pages chronicled a journey of academic excellence and professional promise that had once defined her entire identity. She traced her finger along the edges of her diploma, remembering the pride in her parents' eyes on graduation day. She had been their American dream realized. The daughter of immigrant farm workers who had scraped together every penny to support her education. Her mother had cleaned houses for 20 years to help pay for medical school. Her father had worked double shifts in the fields, his hands permanently stained by soil and determination. The research papers told the story of a brilliant young doctor specializing in pediatric emergency medicine. Rapid diagnosis and treatment of respiratory distress in minority populations had been her most cited work, a study that revealed how unconscious bias in emergency rooms led to delayed treatment and higher mortality rates among children of color. Back then, this was her language: complex medical terminology, peer-reviewed research, life and death decisions made with confidence and expertise. She had been Dr. Rodriguez, the rising star who could diagnose respiratory failure from across a room, who could intubate a struggling infant in under 30 seconds, who had saved countless lives. The last time she had touched these papers, she'd been packing them away in preparation for the biggest sacrifice of her life. Isabella had been born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a rare and complex congenital heart defect that required multiple surgeries and round-the-clock care. Maria's husband, Carlos, had left 6 months after Isabella's diagnosis, unable to handle the stress and financial burden of a special needs child. "This isn't what I signed up for," had been his parting words. Suddenly, Maria faced an impossible choice: maintain her demanding career as an emergency room physician while her critically ill daughter needed constant medical supervision, or sacrifice. Everything to become Isabella's full-time advocate and caregiver. She chose Isabella. The transition had been devastating. Medical residencies don't pause for personal crises. Hospital administration don't hold positions for doctors who need to step away indefinitely. Her colleagues, initially sympathetic, gradually moved on as her absence stretched from months to years. When Isabella's condition stabilized enough for Maria to consider returning to work, she discovered that the medical world had little patience for gaps in employment, regardless of the reason. Hospitals wanted doctors with current experience, active licenses, and uninterrupted career trajectories. Despite her stellar academic record and published research, interview after interview ended with the same polite rejection. "We've decided to go with a candidate whose experience is more current." After 2 years of rejections and dwindling savings, Maria had applied for the hospital cleaning position out of desperation. At least it kept her close to medicine, even if only as an observer. At least she could still smell the antiseptic that reminded her of purpose. At least she could still hear the medical conversations that had once been her native language. She never told Isabella about the sacrifice she'd made. Her daughter knew that Maria had been a doctor before, but she didn't know the extent of what had been given up. Isabella believed her mother had simply chosen to change careers, not that she'd been forced out by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But this time, watching that baby struggle for breath while doctors dismissed both, the child's suffering and her own medical expertise, Maria didn't cry. She didn't retreat into bitter memories or self-pity. Instead, she turned to her laptop and started to research. Hospital licensing databases, medical board records, patient advocacy organizations, legal precedents for medical malpractice based on discriminatory care. She pulled up the hospital's own policies on emergency treatment protocols and patient rights. "There it is," she whispered to herself, as she found exactly what she was looking for. It was always there. According to St. Mary's own emergency treatment guidelines, any patient presenting with respiratory distress should receive immediate triage assessment, including oxygen saturation monitoring and chest X-ray within 15 minutes of arrival. The hospital's non-discrimination policy explicitly prohibited differential treatment based on race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Dr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson hadn't just been cruel. They had violated the hospital's own medical protocols and ethical guidelines. Maria spent the rest of the night documenting everything she remembered from both encounters with the young mother and her baby. Times, dates, witnesses present, specific symptoms observed, exact words spoken by the physicians. Her medical training had taught her to be precise and thorough in documentation, skills that had never left her, even after years away from practice. By morning, she had a comprehensive report that detailed not just medical negligence, but institutional discrimination that put lives at risk. She also had a plan. The hospital was still cloaked in pre-dawn quiet when Maria arrived for her 5 a.m. shift. The parking lot held only a few cars belonging to night shift staff and security guards. The usual bustle of activity wouldn't begin for another 2 hours, giving her the perfect window for what she needed to do. She entered through the staff entrance as always, but instead of heading to the locker room to change into her cleaning uniform, she went directly to the administrative offices on the 3rd floor. Her master key, issued for cleaning purposes, gave her access to areas that most people never saw. The Office of Patient Affairs sat at the end of a quiet hallway, its door marked with official hospital logos and accreditation certificates. This was where patient complaints were filed, where quality assurance investigations began, where the hospital's reputation was protected and maintained. Maria entered the office and went straight to the main computer terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed the hospital's internal patient advocacy system, a database she'd discovered during her 3 years of observing the hospital's operations during her cleaning rounds. She pulled out the detailed documentation she'd prepared the night before and began entering her formal complaint. Date of incident: previous Tuesday and Wednesday. Nature of complaint: medical negligence and discriminatory treatment in emergency department patients. Affected: infant presenting with respiratory distress, Hispanic female, approximately 6 to 12 months. Of age: staff involved: Dr. Michael Harrison, Dr. James Peterson. Witness: Maria Rodriguez. Environmental Services Staff ID 4578. What followed was a meticulously detailed account of both encounters, written in precise medical terminology that demonstrated intimate knowledge of emergency protocols and clinical presentation. She documented the infant's symptoms with clinical accuracy. Patient exhibited intercostal retractions, nasal flaring, tachypnea, and perioral cyanosis consistent with severe respiratory distress. Oxygen saturation appeared critically low, based on visible cyanosis and labored breathing patterns. She detailed the physician's responses, their dismissive attitudes, their failure to perform basic triage assessments, their violations of the hospital's own emergency treatment protocols. Most importantly, she documented their discriminatory language and behavior, including specific quotes and the presence of witnesses. But Maria's masterstroke was what she did next. She cross-referenced the hospital's emergency department logs with patient outcome databases, searching for patterns of differential treatment based on patient demographics. Her years of observing hospital operations had taught her how to navigate these systems, and her medical training helped her identify concerning trends. What she found was damning. A clear pattern of longer wait times, fewer diagnostic tests, and higher rates of premature discharge for minority patients presenting with similar symptoms to white patients. The data painted a picture of systemic bias that went far beyond Dr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson's individual actions. When she finished entering her complaint, Maria attached copies of the hospital's own policies on emergency treatment and non-discrimination, highlighting the specific violations she had witnessed. She requested a full investigation and implementation of mandatory bias training for emergency department staff. There was nothing left to say. She saved the report, submitted it through the official channels, and quietly left the office. But Maria wasn't finished. Her next stop was the hospital's social media monitoring station, a small office where staff tracked the hospital's online reputation and responded to patient feedback. The computer terminal here was connected to all major social media platforms, news outlets, and review sites. Maria created a detailed post on the hospital's patient advocacy Facebook page. To the administration of St. Mary's General Hospital. Yesterday, I witnessed medical negligence that nearly cost an infant's life. 2 physicians in your emergency department dismissed a critically ill baby based on racial assumptions about the family. When I attempted to advocate for proper medical assessment, I was told to know my place as a cleaning lady. This hospital's commitment to excellence must extend to all patients, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. A full investigation is warranted. She posted similar messages on the hospital's Twitter account, Google reviews, and healthcare review sites. Each post was professional, factual, and impossible to dismiss as frivolous complaint. Within minutes of posting, her phone began buzzing. The hospital's social media accounts were connected to automatic alerts that notified administrators of potential reputation threats. By 6 a.m., Maria knew her messages would be flagged for immediate administrative review. Her final step was the most important. She contacted the local news station's medical investigative reporter, someone she'd researched extensively the night before. Dr. Sarah Chen had built her career exposing health care discrimination and medical negligence cases that hospitals tried to bury. In her email to Dr. Chen, Maria wrote, "I am an environmental services employee at St. Mary's General Hospital, with first-hand knowledge of discriminatory medical practices in the emergency department. I have documentation of specific incidents where minority patients received substandard care that violated hospital protocols and potentially endangered lives. I believe this story deserves investigation." She attached her detailed incident report and included her phone number. By 7 a.m., as the first day shift workers began arriving, Maria had set in motion a series of events that would force St. Mary's General Hospital to confront its own biases and systemic failures. The local news investigation went live on social media within hours. The hospital's patient advocacy department was flooded with calls. The state medical board received copies of her complaint, and Maria Rodriguez, the invisible cleaning lady, had just proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply the truth, documented with precision and shared without fear. By Thursday morning, the hospital was in crisis mode. Maria arrived for her shift to find administrators huddled in emergency meetings, their voices carrying an urgency she'd never heard before. The usual calm efficiency of St. Mary's had been replaced by barely controlled chaos. The story had exploded across social media overnight. Hospital staff ignore dying baby due to racism, trending on Twitter. The local news investigation had been picked up by regional outlets, and patient advocacy groups were calling for federal investigation. The hospital's carefully cultivated reputation was crumbling in real time. At 10:15 a.m., Maria was called to the administrative offices. She found herself sitting across from hospital administrator Dr. Elizabeth Warren, chief of medicine Dr. Robert Mitchell, and head of human resources Janet Coleman. Her worn leather portfolio rested on the conference table between them, the same portfolio she'd studied just 2 nights ago. "Ms. Rodriguez," Dr. Warren began, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to discuss the complaint you filed and the media attention it has generated." "Maria Rodriguez," Dr. Mitchell read from a tablet, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Environmental services, 3 years of employment. But according to our investigation—" He paused, looking directly at her. "You're also Dr. Maria Elena Rodriguez, Harvard Medical School, class of 2015. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria met his gaze steadily. "Yes." "You want to know who I am?" she said, opening her portfolio and spreading its contents across the table. "So, I'll tell you." She placed her Harvard diploma in front of them, followed by her medical license, her published research papers, and letters of recommendation from some of the most respected physicians in pediatric emergency medicine. "I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School with a specialty in pediatric emergency medicine," she began, her voice clear and professional. "My research on respiratory distress in minority populations has been cited in over 200 medical journals. I spent 4 years working in pediatric emergency rooms, where I saved countless children's lives." Dr. Warren leaned forward, studying the documents. "These credentials are impressive, but I don't understand. Why are you working as a janitor?" Maria finished. "Because when my daughter Isabella was born with a critical heart defect, I had to choose between my career and her life. My husband left. My daughter needed constant medical care and advocacy. Hospitals don't hold positions for doctors who disappear for years, even for the best reasons." She pulled out a photograph of Isabella, a beautiful teenager with her mother's determined eyes and bright smile. "I tried to return to medicine 2 years ago. Despite my qualifications, no one would hire a doctor with a gap in employment. So I took this job to keep food on the table and stay close to medicine, even if I could only observe from the sidelines. Janet Coleman was frantically typing notes. Dr. Mitchell looked stunned. Dr. Warren's expression shifted from administrative caution to genuine concern. But I didn't leave medicine, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. Medicine never left me. When I saw that baby in respiratory distress being dismissed as just a cold, every instinct I'd ever developed screamed. That child was dying. When Dr. Harrison and Dr. Peterson told me to know my place, they had no idea that my place had once been saving lives just like that infant's. She pulled out printouts of the hospital's own emergency protocols and patient statistics. I've spent 3 years watching this hospital. I've seen the patterns, how minority patients wait longer, receive fewer diagnostic tests, and are discharged prematurely at rates that violate your own quality standards. I documented it all. Dr. Warren was studying the statistical analysis Maria had prepared. This data, it's comprehensive, professional. I may clean floors now, Maria said, but I still know how to read medical literature, analyze patient outcomes, and identify systemic failures. That baby who nearly died? He represents dozens of others whose suffering has been minimized because of unconscious bias and institutional discrimination. The room fell silent as the administrators absorbed the full scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a complaint from a disgruntled employee. This was a professionally documented case of medical negligence from someone uniquely qualified to assess it. Dr. Mitchell finally spoke. Dr. Rodriguez, Maria, why didn't you ever tell anyone about your background? Would it have mattered? Maria asked quietly. I'm still the same person whether I wear scrubs or a cleaning uniform. The same intelligence, the same compassion, the same ability to recognize a medical emergency. If my voice only has value when you know my credentials, that says more about this institution than it does about me. In that quiet conference room, they finally saw Maria Rodriguez, not as the invisible cleaning lady they'd dismissed for 3 years, but as the accomplished physician she had always been, the advocate she had never stopped being, and the woman who had sacrificed everything for love and family. The question now, Maria said, closing her portfolio, is what this hospital plans to do to ensure that no other child suffers because their parents don't fit someone's idea of who deserves quality medical care. The following Monday morning, Maria stepped into St. Mary's General Hospital like she had for 3 years, but everything was different. As she walked through the main entrance instead of the staff door, conversations stopped. Heads turned. The woman who had been invisible for so long was now the center of everyone's attention. The lobby was busier than usual, filled not just with patients and families, but with reporters, hospital board members, and representatives from patient advocacy organizations. Word of her story had spread far beyond the local community. As she approached the reception desk, something unprecedented happened. The room erupted in applause. It started with Mrs. Chen, an elderly patient she had often helped during her cleaning rounds, who slowly rose from her wheelchair, clapping. Then, the woman at the information desk joined in. Soon, dozens of people, patients, families, even some staff members, were standing and applauding. "Thank you," called out a young father holding his toddler. "Thank you for speaking up for our children." Maria felt tears prick her eyes, but she maintained her composure as she was escorted to the hospital auditorium where a special assembly had been called. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Hospital employees filled every seat, with overflow, crowding the aisles and doorways. At the front of the room, Dr. Warren stood at a podium beside a large banner reading, "Commitment to Excellence for All Patients." 2 weeks ago, Dr. Warren began, this hospital failed one of its most fundamental obligations, to provide equitable care to every patient who walks through our doors. Today, we announce comprehensive changes to ensure this never happens again. The changes were sweeping: mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff, revision of emergency department protocols to eliminate disparities in care, establishment of a patient advocacy position to ensure all voices are heard, and creation of a community advisory board to monitor care quality across all demographics. But the most significant announcement came next. Dr. Maria Rodriguez has been offered a position as our new Director of Emergency Medicine Quality Assurance and Patient Advocacy, Dr. Warren announced. This position will allow her to use her exceptional qualifications to ensure that every patient receives the standard of care they deserve. The applause was thunderous, but Maria had requested to speak before accepting any position. She walked to the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, some supportive, some skeptical, all paying attention in a way they never had before. Thrilled. Years ago, I became invisible in this hospital, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Not because I lacked knowledge or qualifications, but because you saw only my uniform, not my humanity. You heard only my accent, not my expertise. You noticed only my job title, not my intelligence. The room was completely silent. But here's what I learned during those 3 years of invisibility. Every person in this hospital has value. The security guard who works nights to support his family. The food service worker who remembers every patient's dietary restrictions. The housekeeping staff who provide comfort to scared families with just a kind word. We all matter. She paused, making eye contact with people throughout the auditorium. I didn't speak up because I wanted recognition or revenge. I spoke up because a baby was dying and 2 physicians let their biases cloud their medical judgment.